They say greed has no bottom, but for one man it had a blueprint. Precise, methodical, and cold as a winter wind off the bay. He wasn't just chasing a fortune. He was orchestrating a campaign. A calculated spree of bank robberies where human life was collateral, and hesitation was a foreign word. Anyone who stepped into his path, whether they wore a badge or carried a briefcase, was dispensable. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been here before. But this time, the rules were different. This wasn't just a lone wolf with a stolen revolver and a shaky trigger finger. This was a pack, an outfit built on discipline, deception, and an unshakable belief that they could outwit the very agency built to catch them. It all began on an October morning that looked like any other in Martinez, California, a quiet town tucked 50 kilometers from Oakland's hum. But on that day, before the sun had even burned off the night mist, a silent figure slipped across the rooftop of a bank, moving like a shadow that knew where it didn't belong. He carried tools, not crude ones, but sophisticated instruments worthy of a master locksmith. An electric saw that whispered instead of roared, a drill so silent it could have passed for the ticking of a watch. He wasn't guessing. He knew exactly where to cut. He'd memorized the building's weaknesses, flaws invisible to the untrained eye. The ceiling cavity, he'd discovered, was a blind spot in the bank's security system. Motion detectors guarded the lobbies and hallways, but no one thought to place a sensor between roof and ceiling. That void became his sanctuary. He stayed still, waited. Time was his accomplice. Beneath him, the sensors blinked, watching for ghosts. But he knew, in just a few hours, the morning staff would arrive, punch in their codes, and disarm the system from within. He didn't need to force his way in. He just needed to be patient. While the city yawned awake, trouble was already stretching its limbs across town in Pleasant Hill. Barely 3 kilometers from the Martinez branch, an anonymous call rattled through the dispatch line. The voice identified himself as Kyle Farrell, said he'd seen 2 armed men walk into a supermarket, gave just enough detail to sound urgent, then hung up. Officer Bob Lauderdale answered the call. A seasoned patrolman with years under his belt, he rolled up to the scene at a steady pace. No sirens, no panic, just experience telling him to trust, but verify. Across from the supermarket, near a crusty old payphone, a man stood watching the scene with an interest that ran a little too deep. He wore a full-face motorcycle helmet and a jacket with black and brown sleeves, a combination built to blend in, but just off enough to make Lauderdale remember it. Inside the store, officers searched every aisle, but it was empty of threats. No suspects, no weapons, just confused shoppers and too many questions. Back in Martinez, the intruder remained nestled in the crawlspace, listening for footsteps and coded beeps. And then, as the clock neared 9, the moment arrived. An employee walked in, just like clockwork, and with the press of a few buttons, shut down the alarm system. To her, it was another Tuesday. To him, it was an open vault. From above, he watched as she keyed her way into the room behind the ATM, a chamber loaded with fresh bills. She was prepping the dispensers, humming something tuneless. Then it came. "Hands up! Don't move!" His voice cut through the silence like a switchblade through silk. She froze. The door snapped shut behind her, locking with an audible click. She was alone. Or so she thought. "Open it!" he demanded. Not a plea, a command. "Or she doesn't walk out." Terrified, her co-worker punched in the override. The masked man slipped inside, weapon drawn, adrenaline in his veins, and a bag hanging at his side like a hungry mouth. Meanwhile, a few meters away, the bank manager, a woman with nerves of steel, ducked into the break room, pressed the silent alarm, and made a quiet call to the authorities. "We have a robbery in progress." No theatrics, no panic, just facts, whispered into the storm. And the storm was coming. Across the city, the Martinez police scrambled silently into formation. No sirens this time, just dark cruisers and grim faces. Radios crackled. Suspect still inside, proceed with caution. As officers surrounded the exits, the robber stuffed tens of thousands into his bag. No die packs, no serial tags. It was clean. He'd hit the jackpot, but he knew the window was closing. Fast. He reached for the back door, then stopped. Too risky. He needed chaos. From his pocket came a bottle. Glass, homemade, wicked. A firebomb. He lit it, hurled it toward a trash heap outside, and turned away as it erupted in a blossom of flame and smoke. Officer Earl Moffat was first on the scene. A decade in traffic control, and this was not the kind of wrong turn he usually handled. The smoke curled around the alleyway as Moffat advanced, gun raised, eyes scanning the gray blur for motion. Then he saw him. The masked man burst from the haze, sprinting toward a chain-link fence. "Freeze!" Moffat barked. The figure turned, raised his weapon, and fired. The shot missed. Moffat's didn't. 2 rounds flew from his service pistol. The robber staggered but kept moving, heaving the cash-laden bag over the fence before disappearing like a ghost into daylight. Behind him, the fire crackled. And the FBI? They were just beginning to close in. Back in Pleasant Hill, Officer Bob Lauderdale still had the supermarket on his mind, a call that felt like smoke with no fire. The mysterious man near the payphone hadn't vanished. In fact, he'd resurfaced, this time just outside the Martinez Bank, nestled in the crowd that had gathered to gawk at the crime scene. There he was again, same jacket, same helmet, same detached curiosity. Lauderdale narrowed his gaze. The odds of that kind of coincidence? Slim to none. He approached, calm but direct. "What brings you here?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Just passing through." "Name?" Another pause, then, "Ural Wills." Not Kyle Farrell anymore. Now he was someone new. But the inconsistencies were stacking up like poker chips in a rigged game. Lauderdale jotted it down, brought him in for a conversation. Nothing formal yet, just questions in a room with 4 walls and fluorescent light that never stopped buzzing. Wills handed over an ID. It checked out. A quick background pull revealed an old arrest, armed robbery, Oakland, 1990. Charges dropped for lack of evidence. Suspicious? Yes, but not enough to hold him, so they let him go. But something lingered, a feeling, a loose thread just waiting to be tugged. The FBI, now fully embedded in the case, took notice. This wasn't just a local flare-up. It had all the fingerprints of an interstate criminal enterprise, and the Bureau knew better than anyone how fast those fires could spread. Special Agent Bob Moore was one of those Bureau men who never blinked at shadows. He studied them. When investigators walked the alley behind the bank, they spotted a trail most crooks wouldn't think to erase. $20 bills, fluttering behind the fence like breadcrumbs in the wind. That's when Moore leaned in. This wasn't a sprint. It was a relay, he muttered. The money stopped abruptly near a side street, clean of prints but rich in implication. A getaway vehicle. Had to be. Agents fanned out, canvassing the surrounding blocks. One resident remembered something odd. A brand new Jeep Cherokee tearing off that morning. No plates, just a dealer tag from a local showroom. It hadn't fit the neighborhood vibe. That was all the FBI needed. They subpoenaed records from the dealership. 60-plus Jeeps sold in the past 3 months. One by one they peeled back the layers, checking names, cross-referencing addresses, hunting for a crack in the ledger. Then they found it. One of the vehicles had been rented, not bought, just a day before the robbery, returned the very next evening. The name on the rental contract? Ural Wills. Moore's eyes narrowed. This was no bystander. This was the architect. But a question still burned. How could Wills have driven the getaway vehicle and appeared on foot at the crime scene crowd within the hour? Then came the Bureau's breakthrough, the kind only methodical digging uncovers. Wills had a known associate, a man from his criminal past, someone familiar with his rhythms, his build, his clothes. Derek "Duck" Jones. FBI analysts matched Jones's photo with surveillance footage from the Martinez Bank area. The likeness was striking. But more than that, it was Wills's jacket on Jones's frame. The misdirection was crystal clear. Jones had played the decoy, called in the phony supermarket alert, planted himself near the scene to serve as Wills's alibi in flesh and fabric. A classic bait and switch. But the FBI wasn't chasing illusions anymore. They were peeling back layers of a meticulous operation. The deception had failed to fool the Bureau's radar. Now they had names, motives, movement, and the net was starting to close. By now, the FBI had tossed out the idea of coincidence like a bad poker hand. Every new piece pointed to the same conclusion. Wills wasn't just another name on a list. He was the conductor of this criminal orchestra, pulling strings from the shadows while others danced to his tune. But he was careful, too careful. Special Agent Bob Moore and his team turned their attention to Wills's financial trail. Credit card records, banking history, rental agreements. Nothing screamed excess. No luxury items, no sudden cash deposits. It was as if the stolen money had vanished into thin air. But even the most disciplined criminal leaves behind crumbs. Then came the break. A rental application filed under Wills's name led agents to a modest apartment complex in Antioch, about 30 clicks from the Martinez job site. The place was quiet, the kind of forgettable beige building that could house a dozen secrets and never whisper a word. It was enough to pull a warrant. 30 days after the robbery, a SWAT team moved in under the velvet cover of early morning. They surrounded the unit with practiced silence, guns drawn, radios hushed. Nobody knew what waited behind that door, but they remembered the bank, remembered that a man had fired at a cop and didn't miss by much. Inside, they didn't find Wills. Instead, crouched in the gloom, was Derek "Duck" Jones, the shadow double, the man in Wills's clothes, the decoy. He went quietly, no theatrics, just the dull clang of cuffs. But the Bureau needed more than just a man, they needed proof. The apartment turned out to be a trove of quiet revelations. Hidden behind closets and tucked into corners were remnants of the heist. A bulletproof vest, a red jacket matching the eyewitness account from Martinez, and a pair of worn sneakers with one damning detail. Tucked into one of the shoes were 3 crisp $20 bills, the kind stolen from the bank, the kind that don't lie. Agents rushed the evidence to the lab. Tread marks from the shoe matched prints lifted from the bank floor. It was as close to a fingerprint as they were going to get. Then came the medical records, a twist even Wills hadn't anticipated. Amid his belongings, investigators uncovered a hospital invoice dated the same day as the bank robbery. According to the report, Wills had checked in with a fractured foot. He told the nurse he'd taken a fall while shopping, but the injury told a different story. The break was consistent with a high drop, the kind you'd get from jumping out of a ceiling. The timing, the nature of the wound, the pain he tried to walk through, it all added up. Still, Wills was nowhere to be found. He had vanished into thin air, leaving behind decoys and false names, using the time to plan his next move. But the FBI was watching and waiting. They knew predators don't hibernate. They evolve. And Wills was already setting the stage for a heist that would make the Martinez job look like a warm-up act. This time he wasn't just after money. He was coming for something far more dangerous. December 21st, 1993, just 4 days before Christmas. While families across Antioch were stringing lights and wrapping gifts, Wills was wrapping rope and loading weapons. The holiday spirit meant nothing to him, not when a bigger prize was within reach. His new mark wasn't a bank, it was a man. Wealthy, respected, a jeweler by trade. Jean Mayer, whose home glimmered with treasures far more personal than vault cash. Alongside him, his wife Ruth, elegant and unsuspecting, the perfect leverage. Wills and his crew didn't come kicking down the door like amateurs. No, they arrived in disguise, suits, badges, the whole act. Posing as detectives, they rang the bell with the practiced poise of seasoned professionals. "Mr. Mayor," one of them announced, "we're here about suspicious activity on your credit accounts." The ruse worked, just long enough. The moment the door opened, the gloves came off. "Nobody move, down on the floor." With guns drawn and voices firm, they seized control of the household within seconds. Mayer and his wife were bound with duct tape, silenced by fear, stunned by the speed of it all. The intruders weren't looking for televisions or trinkets. They wanted the safe, and they knew exactly where it was. Mayer was forced to wash as they stripped his home of its glittering heart, jewelry worth over $400,000. Piece by piece, each item dropped into bags with surgical precision. But theft wasn't the endgame. Before they left, Wills delivered the twist that made this more than just a home invasion. "We're taking your wife." Mayer's eyes widened. He screamed against his gag, but the tape held. "If you call the police, she doesn't come back," one of them warned. Then, like ghosts, they disappeared into the winter night. Ruth Mayer captive, her fate uncertain. 10 minutes later, Mayer managed to free himself. He called the authorities with trembling hands. By then, the trail was already cold. But the FBI wasn't caught off guard. They'd been monitoring the currents around Wills for weeks, and now, with the kidnapping on the table, their tempo changed. This was no longer just a robbery spree. It was federal kidnapping for ransom, a crime that unlocked the Bureau's full authority. And they were already working behind the scenes. The first lead came quickly. The kidnappers had left behind a ransom note, handwritten and sharp. $2 million for Ruth's safe return. No cops, no games. But games were already being played. The Bureau launched a silent, sweeping operation, one that didn't knock on doors. It tapped phones, tracked financials, watched every corner from the shadows. They knew time was oxygen in a case like this, and they were running out. Wills's crew had used Mayer's own car to flee. A mistake. Agents theorized they ditched the vehicle and switched to a backup. They put out silent alerts to local departments, searched parking lots, alleys, wooded cut-throughs. Hours later, the car was found. Empty. Clean. No prints, no DNA, no fibers. Sterile as a crime lab. Wills had covered his tracks well. But inside a garage, miles away, Ruth Mayer sat blindfolded, her ears replacing her eyes. She counted bus brakes, tracked train whistles, listened to the way sound echoed off concrete. She couldn't escape, not yet, but she was collecting clues. And the Bureau? They were closing in. 2 days after the abduction, a crack appeared in the armor. While the FBI tracked phone records and cross-referenced every tip, one of Wills's aliases made a move, a transaction too risky, too loud. He walked into a bank in Berkeley, cool as glass, and tried to deposit a stack of cash. But this wasn't just any bank. This was a bank that had already been flagged. Special Agent Bob Moore had sent warnings to every financial institution in a 100-mile radius. If Ural Wills or anyone tied to him showed up, call immediately. No noise, no delay. The manager recognized him, and just like that, the trap snapped shut. Before Wills could even finish the transaction, the police were on him. He spotted them too late. Tried to duck out, but this time he wasn't fast enough. He was arrested on the spot. No disguise, no backup, just a man who'd run out of shadows.
In his vehicle, investigators struck gold.
They recovered a loaded 9mm Glock, a pager that traced directly to Wills, and most damning of all, a bag filled with fine jewelry, some of which matched the stolen pieces from the Mayer residence. The game was unraveling and fast. But one piece was still missing: Ruth Mayer. Even with Wills in custody, he refused to talk. Hours passed, then days. He stared straight through interrogators like they weren't even there. The FBI knew the clock was ticking. Kidnappings don't age well. The longer she was missing, the slimmer the odds. So they turned the pressure outward onto his crew. Agents worked every angle, flipping surveillance footage, monitoring phone logs, whispering in the ears of known associates. And one of them cracked. His name was Edward Rodriguez, and he'd been the watchdog, the one tasked with keeping Ruth Mayer confined. Maybe he believed Wills would protect him. Maybe the thought of a federal kidnapping charge spooked him worse than prison. Either way, he talked. He told agents where to look: a garage in San Pablo, near a train line, off a bus route. Said Ruth had been held there, blindfolded, restrained, but alive. The FBI moved quickly. A tactical unit raided the building, empty. But Ruth was already gone, freed, not by her captors, but by her own resolve. During a moment of distraction, she'd bitten through the tape, freed her hands. She didn't run, too risky. She waited, listened, memorized. And when she was finally released, she didn't just describe her surroundings, she mapped them. The blue tarp covering a vehicle, the metallic screech of a passing train, the sharp hiss of bus brakes outside, the cold air that slipped through the garage door seal. It was all there. Agent Moore connected those details with Wills's phone records, cell towers, timelines, points on a map. It led them straight to the door. The operation had ended. The takedown was clean, but the story? The story was still writing itself. The walls were crumbling now, fast and loud. With Euro Wills behind bars and Ruth Mayer safe, the Bureau shifted into overdrive. The operation expanded, reaching into dark corners, backtracking steps, shaking every name from the tree. The net that Wills had once controlled with surgical precision was now collapsing around him. His closest men began to fall. Derek "Duck" Jones, the imposter in Wills's jacket, was brought back into the spotlight. No longer just the man behind a mask, now an official conspirator in a federal case. Charged with his part in the bank job, Jones went down hard. The evidence against him, including the cash-laced sneaker, spoke louder than any plea bargain ever could. He was handed decades behind bars. Then came Brian Tomello, one of the men who had stormed into the Mayer home with fake credentials and real menace. The jury didn't take long. With the weight of kidnapping, armed robbery, and home invasion stacked against him, the gavel landed like thunder. Life in prison. But not every link in the chain went quietly. Edward Rodriguez, the weak link, the one who cracked under pressure, saw a sliver of leniency. His cooperation had tipped the scale. He'd shown remorse, however late. For his part in guarding Ruth Mayer, he was sentenced to 8 years. Still heavy, but far lighter than it could have been. And as for Wills, justice came with a sentence as cold as his ambition. For the Martinez bank heist, the firebomb, the shootout, the grand deception, he received 39 years in a federal penitentiary. He was facing more, far more, for the Mayer kidnapping. But then came a twist even the Bureau hadn't expected. A medical diagnosis. Kidney failure, the kind doctors call terminal. His chart said 10 years, give or take. Maybe less. Prosecutors weighed their options. He was already locked in for most of the rest of his natural life. Chasing more years wouldn't bring peace to the Mayers, wouldn't rewind time. So they stopped. And maybe that was justice, in its own cold, clinical way. Jean Mayer, the man who'd watched his world shatter and almost lost everything, stood before a crowd of reporters and said what needed saying. I believe justice has been served. And I hope Wills finds peace, because we already have. The Bureau closed the file with quiet satisfaction. Another phantom brought to heel. Another page in the long, relentless chronicle of federal pursuit. Wills thought he could buy freedom with fear, could rob his way into a legend. But in the end, it wasn't the gunshots or the money that undid him. It was the FBI. Their patience, their precision, their refusal to blink when others would have looked away. That's the thing about darkness. It always thinks it has the upper hand, until the light walks in wearing a badge.